Ever feel like you're playing by the rules and then suddenly they change? Like you're on solid ground and
Yeah.
then bam, the rug's pulled out from under.
Oh, yeah, I know that feeling.
That's kind of what happened in this case.
Oh, really?
Development Bank of the Philippines versus Evelina and Catherine Togle.
Hmm.
It's a Supreme Court case that really makes you think about the fine print.
Yeah, and what can happen when things go wrong?
Exactly.
So what happened?
Well, the Togles, they wanted to build a poultry farm in Davao City.
Okay. Pul Poultry farm Davao.
And at first, everything seemed to be going pretty well.
Makes sense.
It was the daughter, Catherine, who was really the driving force behind this project.
Okay.
I mean, she did her homework. She presented a detailed feasibility study to the bank to get a loan,
Oh, wow.
and they approved it.
For how much?
5 million pesos,
Okay.
specifically for building poultry houses.
So that's pretty straightforward, it sounds like.
Yeah, it does.
I mean, the loan agreement was clear about the purpose of the loan
Right.
and even laid out the steps for accessing the funds.
It all seemed very organized.
Yeah, clear.
So Catherine gets the first part of the loan,
How much was that?
3 million pesos,
Okay.
and she immediately gets to work.
Good for her.
Yeah, she builds 4 poultry houses,
Yeah.
adds a storage, building a water tank, buys all the equipment.
So she's clearly committed to making this work.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So what happened?
Well, that's where things take a turn.
Uh-oh.
So when Catherine went back to request another 500,000 pesos,
From the loan?
yeah, from the loan, DBP suddenly changed the terms of the agreement.
Wait, they just decided to change the rules after she had already invested so much?
Essentially, yes.
Wow.
They claimed that the Toggles were actually supposed to build 12 poultry houses.
Instead of the 4
Yeah,
that she had already built.
right. And on top of that, they said that the Toggles needed to contribute a certain amount of their own money to the project.
Equity.
Yeah, equity, and that was something that was never mentioned in the original loan agreement.
So talk about a curveball, right?
Yeah.
She followed the original agreement and invested her time and money,
Mhm.
and now the bank is adding all these roadblocks that weren't there before.
Totally. It just doesn't seem right.
No, it doesn't. That's why this case ended up in court.
Exactly.
I mean, it raises all these questions about fairness
Uh-huh.
and how contracts are supposed to work.
Right, like imagine if you signed a contract to buy a car, and after you've paid part of the price, the dealer suddenly says, oh, actually you need to buy 2 cars, and by the way, the price just went up.
Yeah, you'd be outraged.
Totally.
So what did she do?
She wrote a letter to the bank,
Okay.
and it's actually a pretty powerful document.
Really?
Yeah, she lays out all of her expenses, shows how much she's already invested,
Mm-hmm.
and points out that the bank is demanding things that were never part of the original agreement.
Yeah.
You can really sense her frustration and confusion in her words.
Yeah, like she was doing everything right, and suddenly it's all pulled out from under her.
Exactly. And that's how this whole thing turned into a major legal battle.
So they took them to court.
The Toggles took DBP to court, arguing that the bank was acting in bad faith.
By changing the rules after the game had already started.
Right.
Interesting.
And that's where it gets really interesting because the lower court actually sided with the Toggles.
They did.
Yeah, they nullified the foreclosure on the Toggles' property.
So the bank was trying to take their land.
Right, because they supposedly hadn't followed the loan agreement.
But the court saw through that.
They did. They said, no, the bank was the one who broke the agreement.
Wow.
So it was a big win for the Toggles.
Yeah.
But DBP wasn't going to give up that easily.
Of course not.
They appealed the decision.
So that's how it ended up going all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, it did.
Wow, so this is about more than just one loan and one poultry farm.
Right. This is about setting a precedent for how contracts are interpreted and enforced.
Okay, I'm hooked. So what did the Supreme Court have to say about all this?
Well, that's where we'll pick up next time.
All right, I can't wait. The Supreme Court really dug into the legal specifics of this case.
Well, I bet.
And their decision actually has some important implications for all of us.
Even if we're not poultry farmers.
Exactly, even if we're not planning on building a poultry farm anytime soon.
Okay.
One of the key legal concepts they focused on was something called the Parol Evidence Rule.
Okay, Parol Evidence Rule.
Yeah,
That sounds kind of technical.
it is a little bit.
Can you break it down for us?
Yeah, so basically, the Parol Evidence Rule says that once you have a written contract,
Okay.
you can't just change the terms later based on something that wasn't written down.
So it's like a safeguard.
Yeah, to protect the integrity of contracts.
Makes sense.
Imagine the chaos if anyone could just twist the meaning of a contract whenever it suited them.
Right.
So in the Toggles case, the bank, trying to introduce those new requirements about 12 poultry houses and equity contributions,
Right.
that was a no-go because it wasn't part of the original written agreement.
Gotcha. So they couldn't just change the rules in the middle of the game.
Exactly. The Supreme Court made it clear that DBP violated this rule by trying to impose conditions that weren't in the original contract.
So it's a good reminder for all of us.
Yeah.
Get it in writing.
Get it in writing. Don't rely on verbal agreements or promises.
Especially when you're dealing with big institutions.
Especially with big institutions, yeah.
That's the lesson learned right there. Always
Yeah.
get it in writing. But you mentioned something else earlier, contracts of adhesion.
Oh, yeah.
What does that mean?
Okay, so think about those long, complicated contracts you get from big companies.
Like when you're signing up for a phone plan.
Exactly. Or getting a credit card.
Right.
You rarely have any real opportunity to negotiate those terms.
No, you pretty much just have to take it or leave it.
Exactly. Take it or leave it. That's a contract of adhesion.
Okay, so like those user agreements online, where you
Yes.
just click agree without even reading them.
Yep, guilty as charged.
I've definitely done that.
So but how does this concept play a role in the DBP case?
Yeah, how does that tie in?
Well, the court recognized that the loan agreement between DBP and the Toggles was essentially a contract of adhesion.
Okay.
The bank had all the power in drafting the contract.
Right.
And the Toggles had little choice but to accept the terms as they were written.
Okay.
So the court took this into consideration and stated that any ambiguity in the contract should be interpreted against the party who drafted it.
In this case, the bank.
Yes, in this case, the bank.
So it's like the court was saying, you wrote the contract, you're responsible for making it clear.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that. So it sounds like the legal system was actually working in the Toggles' favor.
It seems so.
So what was the final verdict?
Well, the Supreme Court ultimately ruled in favor of the Toggles.
Okay.
They declared the foreclosure of their property invalid and ordered the bank to reinstate their original land titles.
Wow, so they got their land back.
They did. Essentially, the court was saying you can't take their property based on conditions that weren't part of the initial agreement.
That's a huge win.
It is. But did the court address the actual harm that was done to the Toggles?
Yeah, I mean, they lost years of potential income, not to mention the stress and the emotional toll of this whole ordeal.
Yeah, you're right. The court awarded the Toggles moral damages for the emotional distress they suffered.
Okay, so that's recognizing that the bank's actions caused real harm.
Exactly. Harm that goes beyond just financial losses.
So it's like an acknowledgement of the human cost.
Right. They also awarded exemplary damages,
Sure.
which are meant to deter the bank and other institutions from engaging in similar bad faith practices in the future.
Oh, okay, so like a financial penalty for acting unfairly.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that. But did they take into account the actual losses that the Toggles suffered from not being able to operate their poultry farm?
Yeah, they did. The court recognized that the Toggles lost income because of this situation. But to figure out the exact amount, they sent the case back to the lower court to determine those actual damages.
Oh, so even though they won the case, they still had to go back to court to figure out the financial compensation.
Yeah, it can be a long and complicated process.
It sounds like it, but what about the money that the Toggles still owed the bank?
From the 3 million pesos?
Yeah, what happened with that?
Well, the Supreme Court ordered the Toggles to repay that amount,
Okay.
but not until the lower court had determined the final amount of damages that they were owed.
So the idea was to offset the loan repayment with the damages.
Exactly like a financial balancing act.
Interesting, but I have a feeling there's a but coming.
Well, the catch is that the lower court process for determining those actual damages has been dragging on for years.
Seriously. Years. Even though they won the case, they're still waiting to receive the compensation they deserve.
Yeah, it highlights how the legal system, despite its goal of achieving justice, can sometimes move incredibly slowly.
That's so frustrating.
It raises the question, what does true justice actually look like?
Right? Is it just about winning a court case? Or is it also about receiving timely and fair compensation for the harm you've suffered?
Exactly.
It makes you wonder about the true cost of fighting for justice. I mean, it's not just about the legal fees, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's the emotional toll, the times lost, the impact on your life and your family.
Right. And in this case, we see that with Catherine.
What happened to her?
Well, she was the one who spearheaded this whole project.
Right, she put everything into it.
And then she faced those criminal charges.
And now this legal battle is dragging on for years.
It's a lot to bear.
It really makes you think about the human cost of these situations.
Yeah, the struggles that go beyond the courtroom.
So do we know what happened to her?
Unfortunately, the sources we have don't give us much information about Catherine's life after the Supreme Court ruling.
Oh, that's too bad.
We know that she was forced to leave Davao City because of those charges.
Oh.
And there's even a mention of her being arrested at her father's funeral.
Oh gosh, that's just heartbreaking.
It really is.
To imagine the weight of that experience on top of everything else she'd been through.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that justice, while essential, doesn't always equal healing.
That's a good point. Even with a favorable verdict, the emotional and financial scars can be deep and long-lasting.
They can be.
Well, this case has been a real eye-opener.
It has.
We've learned about contracts, legal principles, the importance of holding institutions accountable, and the human toll of these kinds of battles.
Absolutely. It's a powerful lesson for all of us.
It is. So what are your final thoughts for our listeners today?
I would say knowledge is power.
Oh, I like that.
Be informed, read contracts, carefully understand your rights, and don't hesitate to seek legal counsel when needed.
All great advice.
And remember, even when faced with seemingly insurmountable challenges, justice is worth pursuing.
Couldn't agree more. It's been a fascinating deep dive, full of twists and turns, and it definitely leaves you with a lot to think about.
It does.
So what resonated with you the most? Was it the bank's actions, the legal concepts we discussed, or Catherine's personal story?
Yeah, tell us what you think.
Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you found this deep dive insightful, hit that like button and subscribe to the deep dive for more thought-provoking discussions.
We'll see you next time.
Until then.